Hey, how's it going everyone? This is Imagine It with Basic Waves, and today we're going to take a look at a granular synthesizer by Dawesome called Novum. Before we get into taking a look at the synth, make sure to check out the presets and samples you can find on the Basic Waves store at basicwaves.com. This granular synth is really crazy. It's hard to explain, really. Now, it is a granular synth, so for those of you who know what granular synthesis is, it's pretty easy to conceptualize. You know, maybe some pads, textural sounds, and if you aren't familiar with granular synthesis, basically, granular synthesis is the process of taking a grain of a recording and expanding on that grain into a whole new sound. You could have a sample of a guitar, a piano, or a synth, and you can have a playhead that jumps around and jitters like this all around the entire audio file and takes basically little grains or little frames and creates a whole new sound just out of that. Now, one of the more traditional kinds of sounds that are made through granular synthesis are atmospheres, pads, things that can get washed out and have a lot of interesting textures, which is exactly what we're going to get into in this synth and in this video. Now, as you'll see here in a minute, Novum features a couple of different functions that are unique to the synth and really expand on the concept of granular synthesis. These key features include the layers function, the layers timbre, the Timbre Flower, and one of my favorite things ever, synthify. And what's even cooler is all of these functions that we're going to go over were designed by the designer of the synth, Peter V of Dawesome, and they were designed with a sort of charisma and personality in mind according to what he's done and who he is as an individual. So you get a sense of, again, charisma in the synth, and it's with you in the process. It's not just kind of sitting there. It's with you, and it feels intuitive and fun to play with. So let's get right into it. Let's start taking a look at Novum and all of these cool key features inside. All right, so here we are in Novum, and right off the bat, we have a really unique UI. There isn't anything that suggests that it's a synth, really. We don't have, boxes and windows for oscillators, filter controls that are immediately right there for us. Nothing is really apparent, which is kind of a cool thing. This synth is actually not as complex as it might seem right off the bat. So let's begin by taking a look at the most fundamental part of the synth, the sound generator. So the sound generator in Novum is called the layers window. So this is where all of our layers are at. This right here is our main sound, and as you can see, we have a bunch of different colors. Each color represents a different layer that makes up the whole sound. One thing that you can do to conceptualize and visualize this better is by clicking on this waveform, and then if you drag upwards like that, you can now see all of these different waveforms, and these are all the waveforms that make up this final sound. So I'm just going to go ahead and play this sound. This is a preset in Novum called Awakening Pad. So this sound is made up of all of these different layers as we just took a look at. So we have these blue waveforms, we have the purple, and this sort of light orange kind of tangerine. Now, what's cool is we can decide what layers in this sound we like through these different waveforms right here and these color dots, these colorful dots here. Each one represents a layer. So if I don't want maybe this blue one, we can hit the on-off button. Maybe I don't want one of the purple ones, maybe this one. And this is our sound now. And for comparison's sake, I'll turn these other ones back on. Right, so what's really incredible about this is you don't have to have a whole lot of knowledge of this synth or really of what's going on to understand that taking away layers and adding layers opens up a wide dynamic range of sound possibilities. And this is just one preset as well out of I think about 300 or 400 or so. Okay, so that's the layers function. We'll go ahead and turn these back on so we get our full body sound. And again, if you don't want certain layers in your sound, all you have to do is just turn these off. Now, before I go any further here, one other way that you can look at the layers is as oscillators. Each layer is essentially an oscillator. Now, since each layer is essentially an oscillator, each layer or oscillator comes with a set of controls that can be affected either in tandem or independently. These controls are the grain size, the density, the position jitter, the skew, and the time jitter. All of these we'll get into in a minute. Now, they're going to work in tandem if we have this chain link turned on, which will be indicated by orange when it's turned on. If we want that particular parameter turned off, go ahead and click it, and now it's turned off, and the grain size will only be changed for this oscillator. If we turn it back on, the grain size will be adjusted across the board. As you can see here, if I change it, go between different layers and oscillators, it's all the same. Now, if I change it here, there, and change things around, then they're all going to have independently set up controls. So now that we have a basic understanding of these layers, what they are, and how they can be seen as oscillators, let's take a look at the different controls below: timbre with all the grain controls, envelope, synthify. We'll take a quick look at effects and mod, but we're gonna focus mainly on timbre, this beautiful, colorful wheel flower right here, and synthify. Okay, so this is the timbre window, and this is essentially where we're going to decide what kind of timbre, granular timbre we'd like on this sound. So I'm gonna go ahead and select this oscillator right here. I'm gonna turn everything off so that it's easier to hear. And as you can hear, as I adjust the grain size, we either get a more tonal sound or a bit of a rainy, staticky mess because we turned down the grain size, so therefore the grains are going to be small and very quick and everywhere, right? Whereas if they're larger in size, slower and taking more time to get across the waveform. And you can see how they get larger and smaller as I adjust the size. This next parameter, density, is essentially how tightly packed our grains are going to be on the waveform. So if we have a low density value like this, we're going to have a grain come in and then another one and then another one. Whereas if we have it really high up like this, I'm gonna turn this down here so it's gonna get kind of loud. You can see the difference in how tightly packed or close each grain is to one another. Next, we have position jitter, and this is a really cool parameter for getting more randomness out of your sound. With a low value of position jitter, you're going to get a steady generation of grains across the waveform from left to right, whereas if you turn it all the way up here, you're going to get a lot of randomness in where the grain will generate across the waveform. So this is really great for getting dynamic and rich atmospheric sounds because you have that randomness. This next parameter here, skew, allows us to adjust the individual envelope of each grain. So if we want to have these slower attack grains, we could turn this all the way up. Again, great for atmospheres. Now, if we turn it all the way down, we're going to get more plucky sounds. So right away, as we turn down skew here, you could hear how our sound became a little bit pluckier. And then with some adjustments here to size and density, we could really get a lot of pluckiness and a little bit more chaos. Next, we have the time jitter, and this is essentially another randomness parameter that allows us to create some randomness in the time generation between each grain. So with it all the way up, you can hear how the grains don't come in with a regularity. They just come in when they feel like it, which is cool. Now, of course, if we wanted some regularity, we would just turn down time jitter all the way and we would have constant generation. Which is really helpful if you want to put this sound that you're making, whatever it is, into rhythmic context, or you want it to follow the length of some notes or a bar or whatever. You just want to be a little bit more rhythmic and have a rhythmic anchor to whatever it is that you're working on. So those are the immediate grains functions here: size, density, position jitter, skew, time jitter. This is where you're going to do all of your initial grain sound design and really where the foundation of your sound beyond the timbre is going to be done. Now, just before we get into this colorful wheel right here, let's go over to these three parameters here. We have gain, pan, and pan jitter. Gain and pan are pretty standard, so I'm not going to go into those. Pan jitter is, again, another jitter parameter, so therefore we have some randomness, and this is going to be randomness across the stereo field. I like to have this somewhere towards the higher end, again, because I want to get a little bit more stereo randomness. It just further creates more dynamic in the sound overall. So with that said, let's take a look at the Timbre Flower here. Now, the Timbre Flower on the back end is a bit cerebral in what it's doing, so I'm not going to go into all the mathematics and all the things that's going on, but I will say what essentially is happening is the spectral envelope of this layer here is getting affected by each individual different dot of color that we have here. Now, one other way that you can conceptualize this is by looking at the boldness, the hue, and the vibrancy of each color. So if we choose this darker blue hue, to me, it sounds like we're getting a deeper, more intimate sound. Now, in technical terms, this can be explained as maybe like a low pass filter, cutting off some highs and taking away the brightness of the sound. Again, from a technical term, but maybe even in a textural sense as well, too. So if we choose white here, if we choose one of these white circles, it basically sounds like we're getting noise, which makes sense because white noise, static, kind of makes sense in that way. This purple lavender color, we're getting a richer, more vibrant and commanding sound. So yeah, this is just a really cool way to dial in the timbre of your layer even more so. So not only do you have all of these sonic possibilities just with the different oscillators, the different layers of your sound and all the grain controls here, but you have a ton of different variations of your layer or oscillator with these different colored dots of this big circle. I mean, there's so many here. There's got to be probably like 50 plus or something like that, right? Now, the next really important function in Novum to take a look at is synthify. So essentially we have this single layer here, this single oscillator, which sounds kind of like a soft square, maybe like a triangle or sine, right? And what synthify is going to do is it's going to read that texture, that timbre of the sound, and change its timbre around to make it sound like it came out of an analog synth. So if I go ahead and play this signal and then turn up synthify here, So what's really cool about Synthify here is it gives us the opportunity to create a little bit more context in the signal that we are using. Doubly, it's not something that I've seen in really any other granular synth without having to like manually add in a sawtooth as one of the layers. This is just a great way to bring things in and have another really just sonic option, another timbre option to add maybe a synth flavor to whatever it is that you're processing or that you have loaded up as a layer in here. Now, a couple of things about Synthify. This is the main parameter right here that allows you to decide how much of that synth flavor you want. So all the way down is 0, all the way up is 100. And then we have transpose, so we can transpose the synth here. So we can go up by semitones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We can also adjust the pitch. So this is just by cents. And then we can also adjust the detune, so we can detune this a little bit. Here we have reference pitch, and this is just going to estimate the pitch that the Synthify synth should be set to according to the layer that we have loaded up here. So if you wanted to manually set the pitch to 440, you could do that by double clicking, hit 440, or if you wanted to set it to the pitch of the sample, if you know what that pitch is, you can set it right here and everything will be the same pitch across the keyboard. You can also add the glide values. So this is glide between notes, and then we have pitch bend range. And then lastly, here on the right side, we have basically a filter, which is set up with Synthify. So we have the frequency cutoff all the way down to 25, all the way up to 25,000. If you can hear that, let me know, that's amazing. We can change the kind of filter that we're using. So if we want a low pass 24, or if we want a high pass 12, high pass 24, band pass 12, you guessed it, band pass 24, or all the way to a low pass 12 at the beginning. We can keep clicking on the LP 12 or 24, whatever it is, cycle through these and choose whatever filter you want. We can also adjust the resonance of the cutoff. Now, dirt's really interesting because dirt adds a little bit of filter saturation. So if you're familiar with how analog filters work, they add a little bit of interesting colorization. We have a distortion parameter that goes from 0 to 100, and we can apply either soft distortion, hard, noisy, or BRTZ. BRTZ and noise I find are really great for maybe getting a sawtooth, more harmonically rich sound. Okay, so now we can also apply a comb filter here with this parameter, this comb parameter. We can apply feedback to the comb filter. So these set of parameters here make it really easy to get glassy and metallic sounds, as well as maybe some weird sort of chaotic sounds. In this sound, as you just heard, kind of sound like voices warbling in the ether, right? So this is a great way to get those kinds of sounds. So not a whole lot of filtering options, really just 2 filters, 1 main filter. But then we have the comb filter here, which is really, really powerful. So again, on the surface, not many filtering options, but nonetheless, incredibly powerful and can get a lot of cool textural differences in your sound. So just to wrap things up, just take a look at effects. If you've seen the previous Dawesome video, all of the effects in here are basically the same and all these parameters are going to look the same. We have a modulation area, so we can adjust key tracking, we can do main ADSR, and do a whole bunch of different things here. Pressure, slide, velocity, lift, glide. Very similar to the different modulations that can be applied in the other Dawesome synth. And as well, much like the other Dawesome synth that we covered, panic here is a quick button that you can press if your sound gets blown up and you're throwing your headphones down and your ears are bleeding and everything. Hopefully they're not. But in the case that you're getting close to that threshold, you can hit panic here and it'll shut the sound off, which is a total lifesaver, especially with granular synthesis, which has a tendency to get really messy. Of course, there's one last thing that I can't forget about this synth, and that is that you can drop in your own samples. And as you can see, as I dropped it in, it said drop audio into decompose. What that means is that it's decomposing the sound into different layers, which is really cool. So each sample that you load in, whether it be a synth like I've chosen here, or maybe a guitar, what Novum does is really, really clever. It breaks apart the different timbres that make up that whole sound and turns each of those different timbres into a different layer, of course. So that's just so wicked to me. That about wraps up this review of Novum by Peter V at Dawesome. Peter V really is Dawesome. Thank you so much to Peter for providing us with the synths to do this review. It's been a lot of fun. This synth in particular is probably my favorite one that we've tried out so far. I love making pads and atmospheres, and Novum is just one of the best alternatives for doing that. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't even say that's really an alternative for me anymore. It's pretty much my main workhorse for doing that. It's just so intuitive, but then there's so many different complex options for sonic shaping. So it makes it a really fun process that I don't feel like I have to pull my hair out to get to the final result in the process. So that's it from me. As always, if you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can reach out to me across all socials at I'mImagineIt or at my website, which is i'mimagineit.com. And make sure to check out the awesome presets and samples on the Basic Waves shop at basicwaves.com. That's it for this review. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.